I love From Software's games. I will go a step beyond and say that they are some of the best games ever made even. But I can't deny that they've made some interesting design choices over the years. Hey guys, how's it going? It's me Fermyon here, and today I want to talk about what I believe to be the worst design element in every Soulsborne title. Keep in mind, opinions are like the grass in Demon Souls. They come in different flavors. What I aim to do here is just have a conversation about various hot topics in the Souls community. If that sounds alright with you, then let's not waste any more time, and let us start with Demon Souls. With the first proper Souls game, not counting Kingsfield, Demon Souls was actually really well received. Back then it was something rather unique, filled to the brim with ideas and design choices that really weren't all that common for its time period. Many of these design elements would show up and even become the core of most of From Software's games, even a decade later. It's important to recognize that this was the first iteration of what Souls was meant to be. Some of these ideas were great, while others, let's just say, they kinda missed the mark. I know that everyone, myself included, thinks of word and character tendency the moment Demon Souls is mentioned. There's a reason for that. It's not a good system by any means, but I don't think it's actually the worst one, and I will explain why in just a little bit. What I consider to be the actual worst design choice, by far, it would be health loss on death. Before I delve into why I think that is a bad system, we should first discuss what death entails in this genre. It's actually a really well crafted idea. You die, you temporarily lose your currency, but you can reclaim your lost resources if you manage to get back to your body without once again dying. This, I think we all can agree, is totally fine. It's a feature that pushes you to do better than last time and to not repeat your mistakes. You only get screwed if you repeat them. The problem with losing your health after dying is that it adds another layer of punishment, something that ends up being extremely discouraging, and it also makes getting back to your body much more difficult than it should be. You could argue that soul loss is also discouraging on the other hand. But the reality is that it only occurs when you die again without reclaiming your body. Even in a worst case scenario where you lose all your souls, you could easily farm them back because it's an unlimited resource. On the other hand, you will almost never have your character at maximum potential because the item that restores your health to 100% of its value is available only in limited quantity. To be fair, there are ways you can farm them, but that requires you to be at the very end of the game, something which many people who quit over this feature will not have access to. For veteran players, this is only going to be a minor inconvenience. For someone who is new to the genre, it might simply become something too much to bear. Quick disclaimer, I'm aware that this feature does in fact reappear in Dark Souls 1 and 2. However, I will not be listing them simply because I feel like talking about health loss and the way it differs from each title would be kind of boring. We all love variety, right? Anyway, besides this feature, there have been a few other ones that I really didn't like too much, but they haven't bothered me enough to put them on the number 1 spot. Once again, with the tendency, I think we all can agree it does in fact suck for the most part. But thankfully there are ways you can essentially avoid messing it up, which is why I didn't hate it just as much. However, I want it to be clear, I do think for a first playthrough it can be really annoying. But whenever you decide to go for a new playthrough, you will be knowledgeable in the way the system works and you will be able to exploit it. I also really dislike the fact that there are armor pieces that are gender locked. I want to play Fashion Souls, damn it, and this is something that restricts my full potential. But anyway, moving on to Dark Souls, this is where things really took off for the Souls series. Of course, largely it was similar to what Demon Souls had to offer. That said, there have been many changes done to the already existing formula. Besides some gameplay tweaks and removing a couple of features, arguably the biggest change was the introduction of the Covenant system. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Covenants. I think they add a lot of replay value and incentivize player interaction more than anything else, really. I genuinely wish we had them in Elden Ring as well. So the question is, why am I talking about covenants in a video about bad features? There is one in specific that was an interesting idea that just ended up being really badly implemented. To the point where I feel like most people don't even interact with it or even know what it's about. And that would be the Gravelord Servant. Let me give a basic summary of what this covenant is all about. The idea is that you, the Gravelord Servant, are meant to infest the words of other people by using an Eye of Death. You will curse other players and summon additional enemies for them to fight. By doing this, you're also sending out your summon sign for PvP. If they kill you, the curse ends. It's also worth noting that you can infest up to 5 other players, maybe even more, which means that they could all potentially gang up on you and have a 5 versus 1 PvP match. Sounds kind of fun, right? So in that case, what's wrong with this? Well, first and foremost, this is a covenant meant primarily for New Game Plus. You can infest any player, but it won't have an effect on them unless they are doing a New Game Plus cycle. The problem here is that I feel like most people who do New Game Plus only do so with the purpose of collecting every item in the game, without really having any intentions of doing PvP of any kind, which then further reduces the number of potential targets and people you can actually interact with. To put it simply, it's going to take ages finding people who are actually eligible for this covenant activity. Don't get me wrong, on paper, I think the idea of this covenant is awesome. It's essentially a soft form of invasions. You make the game harder for them, and if they want to fix that, they have to beat you. Again, the issue is the implementation. Besides this feature, I also really want to talk about another one that I don't like as much, and that would be the way healing works in Dark Souls 1. In Demon's Souls it was pretty simple. You get a bunch of consumable items from enemies or by buying them, and you just use them to heal yourself whenever needed. In Dark Souls 1, it's a bit different. You have a flask that refills at every bonfire. You can upgrade it to heal more, but if you want to increase the number of uses, you don't upgrade the flask itself, but rather, you upgrade the bonfire. It's worth noting, you will only have the increased number of flasks when you're resting at the upgraded bonfire. The reason why I don't like this is because instead of upgrading your character, you know, arguably the most important thing in an RPG, you upgrade the checkpoints around you, which then creates the issue that you'll become more dependent on those specific bonfires, unless you upgrade every single one you find. But even then, I don't think these features are that awful. It's just that Dark Souls 1 has so many good things going for it that it's really hard finding a system that is fundamentally bad. But don't worry, we'll get some spicy ones soon, because Dark Souls 2 is coming up. I feel like Dark Souls 2 is an extremely special case. It doesn't matter if I say that I love the game, or that I hate it. I think that statement alone would be enough to upset somebody. And that's exactly why I will go one step beyond and say that Dark Souls 2, in my opinion, has both the best and the worst ideas ever introduced in the series. Sadly, I'm not here to discuss the best ones, but rather the ones on the other side. What I consider to be straight up bad. I think it's pretty clear that nobody likes adaptability. Arguably the worst that FromSoft has ever created. To give a quick rundown, in case you've forgotten what it does. Basically, your iframes in DS2 are tied to agility. A stat mostly leveled up by adaptability. The higher your agility, the higher your iframes. This sucks mainly because instead of allowing you to level up, the stat that, you know, give your character identity and define you for what you want to be, you are forced to first focus a bunch of points into this stat, just so that your experience will be slightly better. It's also worth noting that in the previous games and pretty much every single Soulsborne except DS2, iframes were tied to your equip load. Make no mistake, Dark Souls 2 also has the usual light, mid and heavy rolling, but they only impact your recovery frames. Invincibility frames on the other hand, are tied to your agility. And honestly, despite that, I just can't bring myself to say that this is the worst feature of Dark Souls 2. See, after the initial annoyance, it stops being something that you think about. It's bad for like an hour, and while yes, first impressions matter the most, I think it's worth noting that, at least in my opinion, there's some which just feel worse and for a longer period of time. And honestly, even if you ignore adaptability, your experience is gonna be fine for the most part, although sometimes you're gonna really want to focus a few points into it. God fucking damn it, not again! Instead of agility, what I consider to be the worst feature, and I want to preface this by saying it's a hot take, is the way torches work. I love how some enemies are afraid of fire. I love how you can use torches to fundamentally make boss fights easier. But just why add the timer to them and make it so that you have to light them up whenever you want to use them? I know the butterflies exist, but I just think that this entire system is simply unfun. Mind you, not the cool stuff you can do with a torch. Just the timer and needing a fire to light one up in the first place is annoying to me. I understand. This is something that probably only I am bothered by, but let me explain. One of my favorite things in all of Soulsborne is the overall atmosphere the games provide. I often play at night, in the dark, and there's nothing that feels more cozy and atmospheric than going around ruins and castles while having a torch out. I know these games have lamps you can use so that your hands will be free instead, but that doesn't matter to me since I just love the overall ambience provided by having a lit up torch. In Dark Souls 2, this is not all that possible, unfortunately. At least, not without some compromise. And again, I want to say I understand most people aren't going to feel this way about it, which I think is totally fine. It's more of just a, hey, this bothers me for this specific reason. But it does make me wonder, what do you think is the worst feature of Dark Souls 2? Oh, and I also want to say I hate how Estus now heals over time instead of providing a burst healing. Really? Why? But, with all that said, it's time for what I believe to be most people's favorite, Bloodborne. Usually, when people talk about the problems in this game, what tends to pop up the most is, obviously, the chalice dungeons, which I think is fair. I know this is going to sound like an insane man's confession, but I actually really enjoyed doing them. I have completed every single chalice dungeon in the game a few times, and honestly, I could talk more in detail about why I had fun with them. But the basic gist is that they are very relaxing to do for me, and besides that, they are actually very rewarding. Rewarding in the sense that they actually have some of the best farms in the game for pretty much everything. Blood echoes, blood rocks, equipment, and so on. Also, here's a little known fact. But did you know that there are invisible walls in Bloodborne? You can only find them in some of these dungeons, but they do exist. Anyway, from what I have seen online and from talking to other people about this, the main reason why people don't like them is because they are repetitive and they can get very boring. And you know what? I can absolutely agree with you. If you are somebody who thinks that chalice dungeons are the worst feature of Bloodborne, I don't think you're gonna be wrong. Me personally, I don't feel that way. I genuinely like them and I mean it. But I can absolutely understand if somebody doesn't. But I suppose it's about time I say what the worst feature is in my opinion. And that would be the blood vials. Having a reusable healing item, at least for me, is so much better than relying on a consumable item that will eventually deplete. Now, don't get me wrong, I have absolutely nothing against them in Demon Souls, and I have one major reason why. Simply put, Demon Souls, compared to Bloodborne, is very easy. The reality is that you're going to be constantly flooded with moongrass everywhere you go, mainly because a lot of enemies are dropping it, but also because it's a very cheap resource. On the other hand, Bloodborne is a genuinely difficult game. I think we all can agree that there are bosses that we can stomp very easily, and then we get stuck on somebody for a few hours. I feel like it happened to all of us. I remember when I was doing Orphan of Kos for the first time. I had about 300 vials ready, just in case. And guess what? I couldn't beat him. You know what I had to do? I had to go back and I had to farm for more blood echoes, and I had to use those blood echoes to buy more blood vials, and then I went back to Orphan of Kos to fight him again, and I keep dying, and I lose again, and I have to go back and I have to repeat all of this. And you know what? I had fun. It was genuinely good. But I do wish there wasn't the element of having to farm for the vials again and again. I hate to admit it, but I also had this happen while doing Lawrence and also while doing Eileen's quest train, especially with the last guy. How is this one single NPC harder than every single base game boss? I don't understand. But anyway, there's also another feature that was super close to being the worst, at least in my opinion. And that would be enemies absorbing your souls. As a concept, I think it's a cool thing. But the problem is that it takes the original idea of not making the same mistake twice in a row, and guess what? It adds another layer of difficulty on top of it. Now you are pretty much obligated to do better than you previously have, which is usually not going to happen. Of course, this is anecdotal evidence, but I feel like every time I died and had my souls absorbed by someone, I would not get them back anymore. Honestly, this hurts my soul more than the story of Gurman. Wish I could have come back in time and saved you, buddy. Also, while we are still on the topic of time, let's just skip to the end of it and start discussing Dark Souls 3.
Yom, old friend. I, Siegfried of the Knights of Katarina, have come to uphold my promise. Let the sun shine upon this Lord of Cinder.
You remain among the accursed.
Whatever thou art, stay away. I beg of thee, the spread of the abyss must be stopped.
Is this the blood? The blood of the Dark Soul?
Ashen One, hearest thou my voice still?
From what I see in most general discussions, Dark Souls 3 tends to get a lot of criticism when it comes to things like linear level design, a very washed out color palette, the frequency of swamps in so many levels, or for the fact that it has way too much fanservice, including elements from both Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2. That said, you almost never see people complaining about the gameplay loop itself. It even ended up being so good that Elden Ring plays almost exactly like Dark Souls 3. So on that note, what would qualify as something that's really, really bad? Honestly, there is just one thing that actually bothered me about Dark Souls 3. And of course, Covenants are once again the focus of the discussion when it comes to a feature being badly implemented. Let's have a short history lesson about Covenant items and ranking up. Don't worry, I will try to keep it quick and wrap it up as fast as possible. Covenants have been a thing ever since Dark Souls 1, but the way they function has gone through some noteworthy changes. The main idea largely stayed the same. You join a Covenant, and if you do the activities associated with the Covenant, you end up receiving an item that you can then turn in. There are some exceptions where all you have to do is turn in humanity, a resource that is already plentiful and can be farmed easily. Anyway, offering Covenant items allows you to then gain a new rank, which, of course, comes with rewards. In Dark Souls 1, ranking up usually makes your character stronger by boosting the damage of the items you obtain by being a part of the Covenant. You also get equipment at certain rank thresholds, but they are all available with very little investment, as most of them you can get while at rank 1, with 10 Covenant items offered. Obviously, There are some exceptions where you get the Covenant-specific items at a higher rank, but usually those required humanity anyway. So it's not that much of a big deal, as once again, humanity can be farmed very easily. In Dark Souls 2, the damage-based rewards are gone, and instead, the rewards you get are usually going to be weapons, armor sets, spells, and rings. The cool thing about Dark Souls 2, though, is that you don't need to do Covenant activities to obtain the items that are being rewarded. A lot of them are going to be available in New Game++ from a different source. In Dark Souls 3, on the other hand, you have to do this farming for every single Covenant item that exists. It goes without saying that a lot of these Covenant rewards in DS3 are actually really good, which honestly makes it feel pretty bad having to go through the chore of farming for them. Alternatively, you could do the online content, but in this day and age, with how few people are still playing, it might be faster to just farm for them offline. I think that the Covenant system was much better in Dark Souls 2, and I genuinely wish Dark Souls 3 had something similar to that. Let's say that, hypothetically, Covenants function differently. What would be the worst feature of DS3? I honestly don't know, because I did not dislike any other feature. And honestly, this is a statement that is even more true for Sekiro. I don't think it's necessarily a Souls-like, because it lacks a lot of the core elements to this genre. But I see it lumped together with the Souls series and other FromSoft games all the time pretty much. And because of that, I don't think it hurts talking about it, right? I will try my hardest not to show my bias here, but I honestly think that Sekiro is a near perfect game. The features that it has just go so well with each other. I love how stealth is not the central focus of the game, but it's a tool you can use to breeze through most of the levels. I love eavesdropping to get bits of lore and to learn about the game mechanics. I love the prosthetic tools, and how you can use them to counter certain bosses and turn them into a cakewalk. There's just so many good things to say about Sekiro, and I have not even delved into the combat yet. So the question is, what is the worst feature in that case? I think this is going to be nothing more than a skill issue from my end. And out of everything I've said today, I'm going to be the wrongest about this. But hear me out. Remember combat arts and the various ninjutsu skills you can do? You can only assign one of these at a time, and because of that, you would think that you can only stick to one while you're in combat. But that's not how it works, actually. You can just pause the game and change them whenever you feel like it, even during a boss fight. Do you see where I'm going with this? I simply wish you had the option to change them on the fly, without having to go into a menu to do so. You know, kind of like how weapon swapping works in Devil May Cry. I understand I am mostly criticizing the lack of a feature, but at the end of the day, there really isn't a lot of negative things I can say about Sekiro. I'm sorry if I disappointed you, but such is life. Disappointment comes in many forms, and one of them is going to be the cave system in Elden Ring. As much as I love the game, I can't deny that I didn't enjoy the caves all that much. You might be surprised hearing this, considering that I was saying good things about Bloodborne's Chalice dungeons. Let me explain. Dungeons, you can load all of them up in your hub area. You don't have to walk around the massive world to find some of the most hidden cave entrances. I agree that on a first playthrough, caves are going to feel magical. We all enjoy that sense of discovering something new. The problem is that after a few cave runs, this feeling will disappear. What about the rewards each of these things provide? In Chalice dungeons, you can find lost and uncanny variations of already existing equipment. These are great if you want to try out a different gem build for a weapon you would like. And speaking of gems, the best ones will be found in the depths of these dungeons. On the other hand, with Elden Ring, most of the things you find in caves are going to be pointless. Sometimes, you might get a talisman, or a piece of equipment that is actually worth something. But, more often than not, all your hard work will be rewarded with a spirit summon that is most likely going to be weaker than what you already have. But anyway, that's about it for me today. I hope you all enjoyed watching me rant. In any case, I will be sure to see you again. Take care, everybody.